It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, all. Al, if I could start with you, the Supreme Court, which, as you know, has a 6-3 conservative majority, didn't even take the time to consider the merits of a Trump case, which was complaining about voter fraud in the last election. In short, they dismissed this whole matter with a one-sentence rejection. And that would seem to suggest that Donald Trump's efforts to reverse the results is null and void. But only 25 GOP members of Congress are willing to say publicly that Biden is the president-elect. This is not a pretty picture for our republic going forward, is it?
Well, the spectacle of the post-election period, with the president crying fraud and all the Republicans being afraid to say, no, it's wrong, isn't pretty. It doesn't do us any good, I'm sure, as our reputation as the world's greatest democracy. But just for the record, Joe Biden won this election by over 7 million votes. His electoral college lead is 306 to 222. Those results have been now certified by all 50 states. So this election is done and decided. The president has made this incredible case that has no validity to it, but somehow the fraud only occurs in states that he lost. Every other state, I guess, is honest. All of his cases have been thrown out in most every contested state by judges, whether they're liberal, conservative, or whatever they are, many of whom actually he appointed. So it's not, it's not surprising that it's not surprising the Supreme Court would reject it. Unfortunately, this circuit is going to go on because there's a rather controversial attorney general in Texas who has decided not to challenge the results in 4 states, all of which have been adjudicated in those states. So I don't think it'll go anywhere, even though it gives Trump some hope, I suppose. But I think Einstein was credited, even though I'm not sure he really said it, with the definition of insanity, which is if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. Well, Trump probably had never heard of Einstein. Thankfully, though, like Barnum and Bailey, this circus is going to come to an end. In 42 days, we're going to have a new president. And the sorry spectacle of Trump will be fading away in our rearview mirror. The one thing I wanted to say, though, is as bad as this is, we've had it worse. I saw Doris Kearns Goodwin on Morning Joe today, and she reminded us that during the Lincoln transition, 7 states seceded because they wouldn't accept the outcome. So we're not quite there yet. We're not going to a civil war. And thankfully, it's not even 1876, where Samuel Tilden won by 3 percentage points. He was the Democrat against Rutherford B. Hayes. And he led after the count was in by 19 electoral votes, but 3 states, there were 3 states where both parties claimed the electoral votes, and 1 state where there was a disputed elector, and that added to 20. And so the Democrats made a deal. They gave the Republicans Hayes the presidency in exchange for withdrawing troops from the South and ending Reconstruction. I suppose that Trump probably goes to bed every night dreaming he's Rutherford B. Hayes, but he wakes up and it's the same old Donald Trump nightmare.
Craig, I have to say, you already had an article in The Spy talking about this definition of insanity. But what's your take on all this?
Like Al, I am a big fan of the Einstein quote, but I actually think it's worse because I think Donald Trump does the same thing over and over again, knowing he's going to get the same result, namely he's going to lose. There's no strategy for winning these cases. I think that the most likely, I thought in his mind, and those around him, is that by continuing to keep this story alive with some part of the body politic, they're going to raise more money. And indeed, they've raised millions and millions of dollars to fight the fight. Some point, it'd be interesting to see what they've actually netted, or is this just a machine to keep paying these people to do direct fundraising? But I don't want to be cynical, but there's no possibility that a strategist sees a path towards success. So I really think, yeah, it's worse than even Einstein imagined. I thought the court, talk about dispensing speedy justice. It doesn't get much faster than that. They're not interested. There's on the Supreme Court with members on it who theoretically would tend to agree with him philosophically on a range of legal issues. Didn't even see fit to let this one be heard. So there's no path forward here. I am worried that my friends in the Republican Party have chosen some kind of a strange short-term arrangement to deny reality, maybe to help in Georgia, maybe to just keep Donald Trump from attacking him until after he leaves office. But it's going to have long-term consequences. No one can sit for weeks on end denying reality and look very strong to the voters. So people can argue the voters will forget. I'm not so sure they will. I'm not so sure that there won't be some sorting out of those who stood for our democracy, stood for the importance of an election. I certainly hope so. And that means there's going to be a price to be paid by those who are in denial. I think December 14th, when the electors vote, is probably the day after which there really is no other answer other than Joe Biden won the election. But this has been a needlessly slow process of transition. And I think there are consequences for that. Let's just not hope they're too serious.
Hey, Craig, let me stay with you. I noticed a few things independent of the Trump drama that I'd like to talk to you about. The first was the New York Times curious editorial that argued that Congress should bring back congressional earmarks. And the other was that two retiring senators in their farewell addresses said that the Senate was broken and it was all due to the filibuster. Can you see a possible future where earmarks come back and the Senate filibuster is gone?
I honestly think those two changes are unlikely. I'd also say I think the earmarks, from my perspective, would be ill-advised to return as a practice. I know that part of the argument was, well, maybe this will somehow cause people to cooperate. I honestly think earmarks are simply kind of a private means to put something in a bill that has to pass to get something specific for the district. There's a clear need for the House and Senate members to really work and collaborate more closely together. But I don't think you get there by reinstalling or reinstating a provision which is kind of a sleight of hand move to get something done. I have benefited by going to a nice resort in Pennsylvania that the former, a long time ago, chairman of the House Transportation Committee managed to get paid for. I landed at the airport, he got paid for it. These features are kind of nice in the congressional district, although I might add that every time somebody's favored by one of these earmarks, there's other people that are competing in the same community that are disadvantaged. So I don't think that would be particularly wise. The filibuster, on the other hand, has been looked at a number of times. It does force, in some ways, the Senate to deliberate and try to build a consensus. And then when you have a narrow margin in the Senate, it's much more difficult. I think that they're reluctant to get away from that. What might seem good in the short term, again, down the road, might work to the disadvantage of the party that today thinks they would be advantaged. So these kinds of reforms are often talked about. They're very hard to get done. And in my view, there's more important things to focus on. There's an extreme need for better collaboration between the parties, within the parties, and between the two houses of Congress and a newly elected president. That's what I hope they can find a path forward on as soon as the inauguration is over.
Al, do you agree or do you have a different point of view?
I basically agree entirely with what Craig said. The reason the Senate is broken is not because we've eliminated earmarks or because we continued the filibuster. It's because the senators need to read the Constitution and realize they're a co-equal branch of government and have the courage to act like it. That's the problem. You know, I spent 10 years working in the Senate, and most of them as a staff director of what was one of the biggest subcommittees in the Senate. So I was right in the middle of all these kinds of things, including the most important reform probably in the last century in Congress, which was the Congressional Budget Act. If you'll recall, in the 70s, President Nixon sort of defied the Congress by just not spending money, impounding money that the Congress appropriated. And in those days, when the Senate was filled with senators of both parties who believed in congressional priorities and the Constitution, members of the Senate of both parties, including and led by really Sam Ervin of North Carolina, Chuck Percy, a Republican of Illinois, and Ed Muskie of Maine, and Annapolis's own Bill Brock, who was then Senator of Tennessee. Those four in particular stood up and said, you know, it's wrong. Congress has the power of the purse, and so we did the Congressional Budget Act. We evened the playing field by creating the Congressional Budget Office so Congress could compete with the president on fiscal matters. That's what you ought to do. You know, I'm always a big fan of modernizing the way Congress operates, but Craig's made a very, very important point, and that is when you do things, when you have systemic reforms that are for short-term political gain, they're usually going to come back behind you and bite you on your rear end, because the one thing that's for certain is today's majority is tomorrow's minority in Congress. Let me give you one quick example that is relevant today. In 2013, when Harry Reid was majority leader, the Democrats decided that they didn't like the Republicans filibustering all the appellate judges. And so they changed the rules to allow most judges to be confirmed without a filibuster by majority vote. You know, they thought they had parties celebrating all this. Well, 4 years later, Donald Trump gets elected. Republicans have control of the Senate, and they couldn't stop any of his cabinet nominees because they'd sort of given that power up. And then it was just a short step forward for McConnell to say, well, you know, we've already done it for appellate judges, so let's just do it for Supreme Court justices. And the price was that all those people who were so happy that they got some judge through somewhere in 2013 were not really happy when Amy Coney Barrett was rushed through in record time before an election because of what they had brought about. It's just a very important lesson. I'll just tell you one other thing. Right before impeachment, we were having a hearing. I was working for staff director Senator Muskie, and we had a hearing. And in those days, when you didn't have all this media, the most important deadline was at 11 o'clock when the wire services had their deadline. And we had a bunch of governors up, and the White House called and said, can we have Linwood Holton, who was governor of Virginia, head of the Republican governors. And he came up and he threw a big stink because we were opposing something that Nixon did and said the Senate is too inefficient. Well, Muskie leaned to me and said, someday we're going to appreciate the inefficiencies of the Senate because they will have saved our liberties. And the point is that some of these old reforms that make me uncomfortable many times, make Craig uncomfortable many times because we're on the other side in particular fights, are important because they protect the freedoms of our country. And so we can't throw them out just because we decide we want to have some short-term political gain.
We'll have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.